Welcome back, everybody. We are here for the Lord of the Rings Tales from Middle-earth set review. And as always, we've got Sligo Yanks on the line, and we are going to be going over every single card and looking at them from a limited perspective for both draft and sealed and rating them between 1 through 5. But first, what we always like to do to sort of make the set reviews easy as we go through the colors is go through an introduction to the set. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at returning mechanics, new mechanics, as well as the draftable archetypes, and just sort of talk about the set as a whole. Go over all of the different things you need to know when you get into the drafts. Welcome back, Yanks.
Good to be here. Glad to be talking about a new set.
Woohoo! I know we skipped last time. Sorry about that for those of you guys who love these set reviews. I do too, but I had to travel, so it was kind of a bummer. But let's go ahead and just kick it off with the new mechanics, because that's the thing I know most of you are excited to see. So the first new mechanic that we have up on the list is The Ring Tempts You. So we're going to go ahead and take a quick look at Call of the Ring. Again, we'll worry about the ratings later. But this says, at the beginning of your upkeep, the ring tempts you. Whenever you choose a creature as your ring bearer, you may pay 2 life. If you do, draw a card. So it's got a bonus ability attached to it. But the thing we want to look at here is the ring tempts you. Yanks, you want to start us off?
Yeah, so when the ring tempts you, 2 things happen. 3 things the first time, I guess, which is you get an emblem called the ring. And it's kind of just looks kind of almost like a dungeon reminder card from Venture. And then each time the ring tempts you, you get to do 2 things. You pick a creature you control to become your ring bearer, and the ring gains its next ability. So the first time it comes out, you pick one of your creatures, and it gets the first ability, which makes your ring bearer legendary, and it can't be blocked by creatures with greater power. And then each time after that the ring tempts you, you can choose a creature, which means either you choose the same one, which is fine, or you choose a different one. The creature remains the ring bearer until you choose a different one, or it leaves the battlefield, or your opponent gets control of it. And then each time the ring will keep getting new abilities until it hits its maximum of all 4, at which point it stays that way for the rest of the game.
So what happens if the ring bearer dies while it has the ring?
So if the ring bearer dies while you have the ring, kind of really nothing happens. The ring bearer dies, the ring stays in the command zone as emblems do, and then when you get another ability that has the ring tempt you, you get to choose a new ring bearer.
Okay. So that makes sense. It's just sort of an adventure that, not an adventure, but a dungeon that you go through over time and your ring gets upgraded. And then you only get these sweet abilities when you have the ring equipped to a creature, essentially. Not equipped, but is your ring bearer, which is kind of interesting. I'm wondering, in paper gameplay, how are we going to note which creature has the ring?
Yeah, my guess is you'll probably just kind of slide this helper card underneath it or next to it or something would be my guess, but kind of like an equipment.
Ooh, I'll just actually put my ring on it. That'll work.
That'll work as well. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure somebody's going to come out with a counter or token that represents the ring.
Absolutely. So of these, where does the ring really start to get super powerful? Which level? I was looking at them and level 3 was like kind of holy smokes to me.
Yeah, I think level 2 is pretty good, right? You get a looter on combat that can't be blocked by things bigger than it. That's pretty good, but yeah, I would say 3 is probably where it really starts to get frightening.
Yeah, being forced to loot sometimes is a little tricky, especially if if games are going long and you have a creature that's not necessarily closing the game out, kind of slow damage. But yeah, I think overall the ring seems like a great deal. I'm excited to see how many cards tempt you and how quickly we can get to the last level of this.
Yeah, one thing that's a little tricky, and I kind of want to see the rules release on this, is that your ring bearer becomes legendary, so I would presume that means you can't play another copy of it.
Yeah, that is tricky, especially in limited, for sure.
I'm not sure about that because the other one wouldn't be legendary. I don't know how that would work.
Interesting. Good point.
I'm curious to see when they do the rules release.
All right, let's head to the second of our second and only other new mechanic, and it's actually sneakily a returning mechanic. This is Amass Orcs. So what this is amass, but they've now gone back and changed the word amass to be amass zombies. So anytime you amass, you do the same thing we did in War of the Spark. You create, in this case, an orc token, and you just add more counters to your orc token as you get more amass abilities or triggers. If you don't have one, you create a new orc. So it's an interesting thing. I like that they've changed the old text to say this essentially. And I think it's a great way for them to bring back that mechanic, which I was always kind of a fan of anyway.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference here is that because the previous ones was always just create an army and it only built on top of something if you had an army, which you never had unless you had amassed, you could very easily have orcs already.
That's
that this
true.
will just get built on top of.
I didn't even think about that. I was thinking about the orc token that it creates that you would have to make. You're right. There is no other army tokens or army creatures, whereas here we have orcs, and who knows what we'll see in the future. You might get like amass elves or something, where there's certainly a ton of elves in the game of Magic, so you could just use it as a +1/+1 counter pump spell.
Yeah, although actually I may be, we correct that. I am mistaken on that. You still have to have an army. It just becomes an orc army.
Okay.
I had that backwards.
So it is the way that I thought. You have to have the token?
You are right. You have to have an army. So that would include things like changelings, which won't occur here in limited, but you have to have something with the army creature type.
Gotcha. So that makes a lot more sense to me. But it goes to show you how confident I am with the way I think things work. I'm willing to believe Yanks on most things.
I was confidently wrong there, so sometimes that's a good thing.
I am rarely confident. I'm just like, yeah, sure. And most of the time when I question you, I am so wrong. So all right. So now we have, like I said, the new amass, which I think is cool. I'm excited to see how this works. I think there is a bit of a sacrifice sort of deck in the archetype in the format as well. So I think that you'll be really happy to see these sort of little amass tokens be generated.
For sure.
All right. Now we're going to go ahead and take a look at the returning mechanics, which there are actually quite a few. And we're going to start with Second Breakfast. This is just a classic pump spell, but it says you also create a food token. So food tokens is what we see for a returning mechanic. I think it's a pretty interesting one. We had a lot of it in Eldraine. And, the fact that it's stapled onto a lot of Hobbit cards like Second Breakfast, I think it's super flavorful and I love it.
Yeah, we'll see when we get to the archetypes that there's a food archetype, food and hobbits together, which what's a better combination than that?
Absolutely. I don't think we need to go too much into detail with food. I think, it's a returning mechanic. You guys have seen that before, but it just makes an artifact that you guys can sacrifice to gain some life. Moving on, we've got land cycling is returning, which we've seen actually some cycles of land cycling in the last few sets. So that's sort of becoming an evergreen. If we do this one or two more times, we probably won't need to go over it anymore. But Eagles of the North does have Plains Cycling 1. So you can, instead of playing this card, it lets you pitch it for 1 and find a Plains from your deck and put it into your hand. It is important to note that you do have to have Plains in your deck. Yanks here this past weekend built my mana base for me because I had to get up and use the restroom or something, and he didn't put Plains in my deck. So I put
1 Plains in your deck.
So I Plains cycled stuck on 3 mana and had no mana to fetch. It was devastating.
But yeah, land cycling is nothing new. The only interesting thing I think is that we see it only cost 1 there, where traditionally it's been 2.
Yes.
Or a colored mana. In this case, it's just 1 colorless, which is interesting.
Yes, I like this card. I think this is pretty good. And typically in the last few sets, the land cycling cards have all been very strong.
Yeah.
All right, moving on, we've got the return of Sagas. I think Sagas are great. I loved them in the original Dominaria. I think they've always been very good. They're very fun. I think that, having Sagas that flip and do crazy stuff is a little much for me. Reflection of Kiki Jiki too much, but I like classic Sagas, especially when they're just uncommon and not insanely impactful. So you're going to see Oath of the Grey Host here. Again, we'll do the set review ratings later, but if you are new to Sagas, if you don't see them because they are kind of new-ish, it's not something we've seen a ton in Magic. Basically, they come into play and you start with chapter 1, and each upkeep you'll go and move up a chapter. And then it will die at the end of the final chapter unless it's one of the special ones that will flip.
Yeah, and we see even here, right, food token, another mechanic that we've already talked about. Treasure, which we don't need to talk about anymore because it's in every set.
Yeah.
So,
Now, the final returning mechanic is actually something we've had in Magic for years and years, but has recently got sort of a new keyword. So I think it's important to note because I know a lot of people are coming back to this set new, after a long break because they're so hyped for Lord of the Rings. So we're going to talk about stun counters. Oh, I totally skipped one.
Historic.
We'll go back to that one. So we're going to talk about stun counters, and what those are is doesn't untap on your upkeep, and it's a counter, so you can actually load up a creature with stun counters. So let's say it has, 2 stun counters on it. On your upkeep, you remove a stun counter, you don't untap the creature until there is no more stun counters on it. So, doesn't untap during a player's untap step, or next untap step is a thing we've seen forever-ish. When do you think that came around, Yanks? It's definitely been around since I've started.
That's been a while. I mean, the classic card was always like Frost Links,
Yes.
2 and a blue, 2/2 that did that for one turn. Counters is just such a clean way to do it in multiples instead of just trying to, there really wasn't a good way to say tapped it down for doesn't untap during its next 2 untap steps.
Yeah, so they,
way to do it.
The power creep is real. So tapping something down for one turn was no longer really relevant or good enough. So now we have to tap things down for multiple ways, multiple turns, and the best way to keep track of that is with counters. So now we have stun counters. Again, it's a thing that will be evergreen. We won't talk about it for long in these set reviews, but it is sort of a new thing. So now we're going to go back to Historic, which is confusing because there's a format called Historic, but here we are. Historic refers to legendary and artifacts. We saw this a lot in the first Dominaria, and it's kind of back. We have cards like Lost to Legend that put target historic permanent on fourth on top of its owner's library. So that is going to hit those creatures, those artifacts, and I believe sagas as well.
Correct. Sagas as well. And I think the biggest thing to note in this set is that first ability on the ring turns that creature legendary. So your ring bearer will always be hit by something like this.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, absolutely. That's very important to note, actually. So I don't know how relevant this historic permanent thing will be. Like I see this card, which, kind of punishes people for having historic creatures or artifacts, but I don't know if it's going to be a theme like it was in Dominaria. I'm excited to see if it's actually a draftable archetype.
Yeah, there are definitely some triggers on casting historic spells or having historic permanents, but are there enough to make it a whole archetype? Yeah, we'll have to see.
All right, so that is the end of the new and returning mechanics. Last thing we want to do in this episode before we move on to the white cards is go over the draftable archetypes. So the first one we have is the Azorius. This is sort of evasion, draw more than one card, and to show you that, we're going to show all of the signpost cards, and the first one here says, whenever you draw your second card, each turn create a 1/1 human soldier creature token. So interesting that we have another soldier. Soldiers are a thing in Standard already, which I actually really like. And this is the kind of mechanic I really like to see. The last time we had this sort of like draw 2, oftentimes we see them in Is It, which is kind of interesting that we're actually getting it into Azorius now.
Yeah, and this is clearly the draw your second card is a trigger on some cards in this set. We see there's a couple others that are if you've drawn 2 or more this turn, at the end step, do something. And then there's, as you said, there's an evasion sub-theme, as blue-white typically has a flyer archetype.
And it's interesting that it's making soldiers, which is going to be sort of the go wide, which oftentimes Azorius is. Sometimes it's Azorius flyers, but again, this is Azorius soldiers is what we saw in Brothers War, but we are seeing like a little bit of a different. Usually the draw multiple spells is it. Like it definitely was an Eldraine, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So interesting archetype. I'm excited to see how good this is because I'm a big fan of Azorius. Let's go ahead and look at the Dimir next. We're looking at a mass control with some self-mill. Not a fan of self-mill, but you've got to do it sometimes. So the signpost card here says when the Mouth of Sauron enters the battlefield, target player mills 3 cards, then amass X, Orc X, where X is the number of instants and sorcery cards in that player's graveyard. So it's important to note that if your opponent has more instants and sorceries, you can technically mill them and get orcs, right? So it doesn't have to be self-mill in this particular situation.
Yeah, and I think most of the cards are just target player, where generally you're going to be building your deck around them and are going to want to self-mill. But if you're getting to that point late in the game where you don't have a lot of cards left, or they don't, yeah, you can tend to target them with a lot of these.
So how is the wording on this? It says target player mills X, then amasses. So they would actually get the creature in this situation.
No, because so it's target player mills 3 cards. That's the end of that first ability.
And the end of that sentence.
Yeah, and that says then amass. It doesn't say target player amasses, so that means you amass Orcs X.
That was the way I read it at first, but I wasn't quite sure, because oftentimes when you have 2 separate abilities like that, they will break it up in paragraphs. But I'm guessing because they wanted to put so much of the informational text, they didn't.
Yeah, I think there just wasn't enough room with the reminder text.
Cool. So I would much rather mill them, of course, just because, sometimes games go long, and that's always a little scary. But interesting archetype. I like the amass. I think it's a good mechanic to bring back, and I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, and it's typically good in some sort of like a blue-black controlling deck, because amass, you tend to go big as opposed to wide, and these are the colors that can bounce things, kill things, kind of clear the path.
Do you, though? Because I remember I did a lot of blue-black back in War of the Spark, and I did a lot of sacrificing with my amass tokens, and I was always trying to get a 1/1, sack it, do a thing. There was a little a 1/4 that gave your amass tokens death touch, so you kind of always just wanted to keep running it into the fence and having it just eat something slightly larger.
Well, I think that's a good segue into our next archetype, because it's some more amass, but it's more of that aggressive sacrifice theme you're going to see when you turn to Raktos.
And that we are going to see Raktos Sacrifice, Orc, and Goblin theme. So we have a legendary Orc soldier. Whenever another creature you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on it. If that creature was a Orc or a Goblin, put 2 counters instead. So it gets really, really big, and you get bonuses for having creature type synergies.
Yep, and as we noted earlier, the amass creatures are Orcs. So that works with this theme. This isn't necessarily a sacrifice card, but want things to die, and there are sacrifice enablers in these colors to help facilitate that.
Yeah, and there's always some sort of bones shards or some sort of sacrifice creature removal, and this sort of mitigates the downside of having to do those things and just gives you an added bonus on the board that makes all of your things that already want creatures to sacrifice or die better. Or if you have small death touch creatures, it's gonna be beneficial if you're able to run them under a bus. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the Gruul, the red-green. This is a landfall creature. This is ramp and power matters, typical Gruul here. So we have a landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Then if that creature has power 4 or greater, it gains first strike until end of turn. And it does say target creature, so it can target itself, which automatically will trigger the first strike. So it's a 4/4 for 4 that gets first strike every time you play a land, turns into a 5/5. That's pretty strong for an uncommon.
Yeah, the power 4 greater ability, I believe, was called Ferocious in Fate Reforged, so we've seen it before. But it fits perfectly into, Gruul Smash, right? Gruul wants to play big things and hit your face with them. And it's a lot of times where you see aggressive kind of landfall bonuses, as well as, this sort of power matters.
We've seen it as the keyword Ferocious in the past, but also we've seen it on a white removal spells where, destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. And 4 tends to be that line where things are now considered big. And this is, the big color. So it does not surprise me that we're seeing that.
Agreed.
All right, let's go ahead.
4 seems to be that sweet spot.
Let's look at some Selesnya, green-white. At the beginning of your end step, if you don't control a food, create a food token. So we have Butterbur, Bree Innkeeper. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this is your sort of Hobbit food deck. I'm a little disappointed that we don't have creature type Hobbit in the set. In this case would be anyway, because Bree is a human city, but we have halflings instead.
Yes, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, flavor-wise, yes, but I wish that they were hobbit halflings, or you know what I mean, hobbits, human, whatever they want to call it, because otherwise if you make them hobbits exclusively, then it sort of nukes them for the rest of the set, or the rest of Magic, essentially, because they're not really going to be making a ton of hobbits. I don't even think they could make more hobbits IP wise. They might just not be allowed to. Like, they're approved to make this set and this set only, so there would be like no more future synergies, and that would make me sad.
No, I get it, and it makes sense. I just, there's so much flavor in the set, like that one just seems a little missing.
So what I was looking at when I saw this card is all of the possibilities there are for food. Now, I remember in Eldraine, a lot of the food synergies was more Golgari. A lot of black cards wanted you to be sacrificing food tokens to get some benefit. And now it seems to be more in the Selesnya, which is interesting to me, but I do like that the hobbits have the sort of green-white, earthy vibe to them. I think this is very flavorful.
Farms and fields, and there's sort of just classic, almost like D&D style village, and
absolutely,
kind of is.
Overall, just looking at this card, I feel like this is not super powerful, but sometimes those synergy decks are the ones that will become the most powerful.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the Orzoff, my favorite color pairing typically, and this is going to be legendary creatures matter. It also sort of has this sacrifice theme behind it, so we went ahead and used this Ruling Steward. At the beginning of your end step, if a creature died under your control, create a 1/1 human soldier creature token. You can pay 2, sacrifice another creature. Each opponent loses 1 life, you gain a life. So you're allowed to poop out more creatures and drain for the benefit, which I think is really nice. It does prevent you from just like sacking a bunch of creatures on this one, because it just makes 1 per turn, no matter how many creatures died. So keeps a lock on it, but this seems like a great creature to me.
Yeah, Orzoff was definitely the toughest to figure out exactly what it wants to be doing, because it's sort of multicolor uncommons are doing different things. Like, this one has some sacrifice synergy and drain life. There's another one that just makes 2 flying spirits. And there's a couple spirit-related cards. So that seems like a sub-theme. According to Mark Rosewater, there's a legendary creatures matter theme. And uses the ring tempts you to help benefit that. So I'll be curious to see what this really coalesces into, since it's a little unclear.
So it sounds like Orzoff, make spirits, sacrifice them, and use legendary creatures to find the payoffs for doing either of those things. And I think that's fine. I'm totally okay with Orzoff being sort of this jack of all trades, weird amorphous deck. As long as the cards are powerful enough, I think that it will be fine.
Yeah.
All right, now we've got Gandalf's Sanction for the Izzet colors. And this is the Spells Matter deck. I mean, I feel like I say that every single time. A little sad that there's nothing new here, but Gandalf's Sanction deals X damage. Again, we will rate these later, but it also has sort of trample for spells, which is cool. I'm excited to see what kind of flyers and things get pumped when you cast instants and sorceries, because that's the thing we've been seeing in every set these days. And there's always elementals usually, right, with these color pairings when spells matter?
A lot of times there is, but I think, at least in looking at the set briefly, it's more of a wizard sub-theme this time.
Okay. Well, we've
kind
seen
of
that
like,
before, right?
Zendikar Rising.
Yeah.
Had that. So I think we're seeing a little bit more than that. Also kind of nice to look at this card and see a bit of a crossover with the blue-black deck, caring about cards in your graveyard, for nice splashes, or a Grixis type deck.
That's true. Another good reason to mill there with any cards that overlap with blue. All right, moving on to the Golgari colors. This is going to be, it's an interesting one. It's Sacrifice and Regrowth, which we've always seen, and it also has some food synergy in it as well. So each player sacrifices a creature. If you sacrificed a creature this way, you may return another permanent card from your graveyard to the battlefield. For 4 mana, this seems fantastic. It lets you immediately upgrade your weakest thing while also killing their thing. I mean, you're upgrading your weakest thing assuming you have something in the graveyard, but late game, you usually have something better than whatever your tiniest creature is, right?
Yeah, the way this has been described is like a life and death theme, right? You've got this, or death into life, I guess, for sacrifice and regrowth. which we see that a lot of these colors. We don't always see it on the same card.
True.
Which is nice.
Yeah, it's interesting to see, some things come back out of the graveyard in the same card. There's oftentimes things that say both players sacrifice, and it benefits you to have those little tokens so that way you can get their much bigger, more valuable cards. But this card seems absolutely nutty, just getting to, regrow your biggest thing.
Yeah, and it's a really nice synergy with land cycling as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you can cycle away like the birds or, whatever those land. Yeah, that's great. And those tend to be very expensive as well. They're top end land cyclers. So you're going to be getting one of your bigger creatures back for sure. All right. Now we have some Boros Go Wide humans. We're going to be looking at Theoden, King of Rohan, which is whenever the king or another human enters the battlefield under your control, target creature gains double strike until end of turn. So a 2/3 for 3 makes a bunch of first strikers. Seems like a pretty solid strategy and very what Boros is always trying to do.
Yeah, it's your generally standard Boros aggressive strategy. Just you get the little human sub theme mixed in.
I wonder if there's going to be any instant speed create a soldier token.
Yeah. That could be scary, or even an ability that would do that.
Yeah.
An instant speed.
Yep, that would be an interesting one for sure. All right, finally we have the Simic color pairing. This is going to be tempo, elves, scrying, just your typical Selesnya stuff. Make some solid dudes, ramp up again a bunch, draw some cards, and win by just having a sheer mass of cardboard. So we're looking at Arwen. Whenever you scry 1, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and you can pay 6 to scry 2, and it's a decent rate on its own. So it's kind of doing everything you want. It's making your creatures bigger. It's giving you kind of card advantage, right? Being able to scry 2 can be quite powerful over long periods of time, and that's what I think of when I think of Simic.
Yeah, I think for the most part, this is generally what you see out of Simic. There's a significant number of cards that have this whenever you scry clause, which is not something I think we've really seen before, at least as a theme. We've seen it on individual cards, but
yeah.
So that's a good way of turning that sort of card selection into kind of actual advantage.
Yeah, if scrying instead of drawing 2 cards in a turn is the thing that's triggering your +1/+1 counters or additional draws, then you're going to be getting a lot of extra value here. You're going to be smoothing out your draws and just getting all of this static value on the board, which seems great.
Yeah, but just to answer a question in chat, no, when you scry 2, that is 1 instance of scrying, so you would get 1 +1/+1 count. If you scried 1 twice, you would get 2. You would get 2 counters, but scry 2 is 1 scry trigger.
Thank you for reading the chat. I'm having a little trouble keeping up with it sometimes. Yeah, it's sort of like whenever you attack, do a thing, you're getting, you are in your attack step similarly. It's just 1 attack, even though you're attacking with multiple things.
Yep, or whenever you gain life. Same thing.
Oftentimes it'll clarify when it says whenever you gain 1 or more life, or whenever you attack with 1 or more creatures. So it does make it a little bit clearer. But if it wants you to trigger this twice, it'll say scry 1, or something like that.
Yep.
All right, so that is the end of our introduction. Yanks, how are you feeling about the set so far?
I mean, it's hard to talk about this set without immediately just starting with how great the flavor is on all this stuff. That's kind of the purpose of this set. So just on that alone, it's already winning.
Are you a big Lord of the Rings fan?
I am.
So we're going to get all the backstory and book stuff that just like we did with Brothers War?
You don't want me going into the Silmarillion for hours, because I could. We actually took a class in college on J.R.R. Tolkien. It was a poli-sci course. It was Tolkien and politics, and we read all the books and the Silmarillion and all that stuff. All
right, I expect some story. All of our comments on YouTube loved stories, so we will be able to give you guys some stuff. Maybe I'll get you a chess clock, and we'll put 20 minutes on it. Every time you story, you have to hit the chess clock. So we get some good stuff, but we keep you from going off on weird tangents.
I mean, there's enough here. Or just talking about like for anybody that's not a Lord of the Rings fan, who the major characters are will be enough.
Yeah. So real quick, what is the archetype you are looking forward to drafting the most before we end?
I'm kind of interested in how that blue-black deck works. The mass control with sort of some mill, self-mill. It has the word control in it, so of course I like it. But I'm curious on that one, I think.
I am excited for... I think this Raktos is going to be really cool. I like the idea of the orcs and the amass mechanic. And I think I'm really interested in the Azorius go wide as well. Typically, Boros is kind of fun for me, but this seems a little too plain to me. But those would be my two.
Yeah, I think green-white too, just the idea of beating people to death with hobbits sounds pretty funny.
Yeah, I agree with that. We'll have to see what the food mechanics look like in those colors.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, guys, that's the end of our introduction. If you guys want to check out our color set reviews, they will be coming out. I'm sure there's some out already, and they will be coming out all week long. So thank you guys so much for joining us, and we'll see you guys when we review white. Have a great night. I'd like to end this video with a special thank you to those of you guys who have signed up for my Patreon. Without my wonderful patrons, none of this content would be possible. If you'd like to support this content and get your name up on the Wall of Fame, you can sign up for our Patreon by using the link down below in the description. Another way you can support the channel is by using code MNG5 with Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find cool stuff in stock. They have everything you need for Magic, board games, and any of your other nerdy hobbies.